I'm here this morning with Dr. Jeffrey Addicott with the Center for Terrorism Law here at St. Mary's University in San Antonio. I'd like to introduce you to my audience. Can you kind of give us a background? I know you initially were in the military, apparently a Green Beret. What all were you doing in the military?
Yeah, I served in the military for 20 years, and I did a variety of activities, but I guess the thing that attaches me to terrorism issues the most is I was the senior legal advisor to all the Green Berets in the military, which is the United States Army Special Forces. I retired in 2000 and came here to Texas. I'm originally from Alabama, and founded the Center for Terrorism Law after 9/11. We had Senator John Cornyn came and inaugurated our center in 2003 when we stood it up. So I'm the founder, the director, and also the chief cook and bottle washer, I guess. We built a facility here in 2005, and we had Congressman Mike McCall came and dedicated this building where we're sitting right here. In that time, we've done a variety of legal and policy issues. We've defended soldiers wrongfully accused of war crimes. That's the thing that I'm most passionate about. Written 2 amicus briefs to the Supreme Court on behalf of our service members. I've also testified before the United States Senate. I've testified before the Congress. I've worked closely with the Bush administration, and I work closely with members of Congress on a variety of issues, ranging from detention issues in Guantanamo Bay. I think I'm the only law professor now that works for the military in Guantanamo Bay, keeping that facility open. I support military commissions. And so what I really do is I bring my military frame of mind to this job. As a full-time law professor, many of my colleagues will criticize various parts of our policies in the war on terror, the Patriot Act, detention issues, drone issues, which is fine because we're an open society and we need to have debate. But then I'll ask them, how would you recommend that we fix it? And they don't want to recommend. They want to somehow remain neutral. I don't want to remain neutral. I want to win. And so my military background is you tell the boss is wrong, because we do a lot of critique of federal policies and federal laws. But then you tell them how to fix it. I'm all about trying to fix things. I'm not really concerned about who the president is, whether it's President Bush, President Obama, or whoever the next president is. It's America. I want America to be strong, America to do the right thing. And that's what our center does, is we propose things. We've done a variety of those activities. We've drafted legislation to the Congress on changing rules of engagement, on open government laws in 2008. And so it's just A to Z. We're a full source resource for everything that deals with terrorism. And of course that emphasis leads us to radical Islam, which is the #1 threat facing the nation. It's not right-wing extremists or left-wing extremists or just criminals. It is radical Islam. It's a growing threat in the nation and across the world. And so we're interested in trying to find out what motivates these people, how to stop them in the long term, how to stop them in the short term, what to do about it, what's the best policy. And so, those involve think tank type questions, and we address those. We do conferences. We've done about 20 conferences around the world. We've done conferences in Cairo, in Jerusalem, Tel Aviv. We've done them in London, in Paris, and of course most of them are right here in San Antonio. And the vast majority of these conferences are free and open to the public.
What, with the status right now of ISIS, how do we best get educated as to what's going on and what we as citizens would need to do?
That's part of the tragedy, is that we have a two-party political system, Democrat and Republicans, and both of them are vying for power. And so we have an ideological conflict, and neither side seems to want to identify who the enemy is. And so the average person is very confused. Are they enemy combatants? Are they POWs? Are they not POWs? What's a domestic jihadist? What is a terrorist? What's violent extremism really mean? Our current leadership denies, and they won't even say the word. It's like a bad Harry Potter movie, the name that must not be mentioned. And that, you can't formulate policy to identify who the enemy is. And so you're right, education is necessary because you're not getting it from the leadership. Our executive branch is not providing, in my opinion, the leadership. They're doing more to confuse issues. When you have individuals at Guantanamo Bay that are enemy combatants, and their solution is to bring them here into federal district courts to try them, as former Attorney General Holder wanted to do at one point, where the president will not identify who the enemy is. He uses the word terrorist, which is a tactic. It doesn't describe who it is. So yes, if you're not getting clear leadership, then somebody's got to inform the public, and that's I think that's why you're seeing so many people concerned about what's happening, and that's one of the functions that we fulfill. And of course, a lot of people don't want to be informed, and they're very uncomfortable with learning the truth, because we also have in our culture these days the issue of political correctness, that it's just not politically correct to say anything that's negative about, you know, Islam, or that would infringe on someone's First Amendment rights or their freedom of religion. So obviously we understand those issues, but on the other hand, it's obvious that this is a growing movement, and it's worldwide, and it's not decreasing in intensity.
We've heard about up in the Metroplex, Sharia law court up there. How does that work with our U.S. courts?
Yeah, again, Sharia law is incompatible with freedom. The European Court of Human Rights issued a ruling dealing with a case out of Turkey several years ago, and they hit that issue square ahead. And the European Court of Human Rights is the #1 international court in the world. And they bluntly said Sharia law is incompatible with basic concepts of freedom. You can't have both. So what is it? It's a very complex legal system that's tied directly into a religious view called Islam. And there is no due process as we know it in terms of our Anglo-Saxon traditions, from the Magna Carta all the way up to our Constitution, all the way up to the UN Charter and the civil and the political, the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. It's just incompatible. So without going into detail about what Sharia law is, it's incompatible. But on the other hand, our law does recognize if you've got in civil actions, these are not criminal actions, if you've got a civil dispute dealing with property or family law of some sort, you can have arbitration. That's a concept that our legal system recognizes. And if both parties agree, they can determine what body of law they will follow. So Catholics might, for example, say that we want to follow Catholic canon law. Folks that are of the Jewish persuasion, they might say we want to follow Mosaic law to deal with this dispute. So to a degree, you can follow a law that is outside of the Anglo-Saxon tradition directly if both parties agree. But there's the rub also, is that, it depends on what the case is. If it's something that has any criminality involved with it, you can't use Sharia law.
Honor killings, for one.
Yeah, no, that's criminal, that's murder. So we do have some individuals that have held themselves out as arbitrators, and they use that word Sharia law, and many people get very excited and they say, well, what does that mean? Well, basically, both parties have to agree. Now, who in the world would agree to a system that, you know, doesn't recognize our fundamental principles is the real question. Why would you submit yourself to a system that's the antithesis of what the European Court of Human Rights has said is your fundamental rights of freedom? But if both parties agree that that's what they're going to be bound by in arbitration, in some instances, it is legal.
If one of the parties questioned it and took it to our court, then how would our court look at that situation?
Yeah, again, in arbitration, both parties have to agree to it. If they don't agree to it, it's not going to happen. You can't force one party into it. And so that's the real issue. But when people hear Sharia law, they're afraid, and they should be, because again, it's the antithesis of fundamental American values and principles. I think the bigger question is, why would people agree to be bound by this religious view that's incompatible with our culture? That's the issue. And what can we do to try to educate people about what Sharia law really is? Because the average person on the street, they just think, well, it's a benign system of arbitration, and why are you so excited about it? Once you look into Sharia law, you'll see that it discriminates against classes of people based on sex, based on religion, based on a number of criterion rather.
So how do we deal with that? Because it is so against the American culture as we know it. And this seems to be a growing issue in our country. What do you recommend?
Education.
How do we?
I mean, education, they've got to be educated. Most Muslims are Muslims because they're born into the religion. They don't sit down and say, well, I think Islam is the most efficacious of all the 7 major religions. just like Christians, just like Hindus and Buddhists. So many people are born into a system where they don't have a frame of reference for the concepts that we take for granted in this country. This, of course, involves our immigration policy, who we're letting into the country. I would say if we're letting people into the country that have an adherence to Sharia law, that's a discriminator. I mean, you've got to basically agree to abide by the principles in our Constitution. We just don't throw open the doors to people that basically are in a Trojan horse and seek to undermine our very legal and moral foundations. Folks that are already here, they need to be educated. We can't allow ghettos to develop like we see in Europe, where people have a system that's the antithesis of our own system of freedom, and cultivate that and sugarcoat it with political correctness. If you're not going to assimilate and adopt Anglo-Saxon culture, you shouldn't be here, in my opinion. America is a homeland for Americans. It's not a homeland for the Middle East. It's not a homeland for Mexico. We should have legal immigration, but we should have very strict rules about who comes into our country, and I don't think that's being done today.
I think one of the aspects of Sharia law that most people are not familiar with is how it would directly impact women. If I understand correctly, back in the 60s, Iran was a pretty similar type culture to what we have today. But as it grew and manifested in that country, then the women's rights were lost, and it's totally changed a generation of women. Would you go into some of the detail?
Very true. The Middle East is not getting more liberal or open-minded, it's becoming more closed-minded. For example, I did a joint program at the University of Kuwait in Kuwait City about 4 or 5 years ago. And when I went over there, I was informed by the administrators that 4 years ago they had co-ed classes. Today, no co-ed classes. 4 years ago, the women could dress up in Western-type clothes or whatever they wanted to wear. Today, not so. And that's Kuwait. We're seeing the trend going the other way, that as radical Islam spreads across the Middle East, it's bringing along with it a return to values that are, again, foreign to Western societies. And it's not, and of course if you question these people, they'll deny that it's true. But it is true. Anybody that's objective and looks at the facts will realize that it's a system of tyranny for women. There is no equality between male and female in this view of Islam. It's simply not there. So you can talk about that it's an equal system, separate but equal. No, it's not separate but equal. It's discriminatory towards women, discriminatory towards people of other religious faiths.
So here we are, and it continues to grow. What is feeding it? What's causing this surgence to happen across the globe?
Well, it's a religious movement, and religious movements have sometimes a life of their own. And clearly, if you deny that it's a religious movement, then you've got your head in the sand. I think, again, the driving force has got to be individuals that do not hear about what it really is. They simply don't know what it is. As I said, most people that are not Muslim, they assume that it's like their own religious belief. Islam does have a moral foundation that's very similar to Christianity, Judaism, Hinduism, Buddhism. Don't steal, don't lie, don't cheat. Yeah, that stuff's all in there, the pillars of Islam. But it also has another side, and people don't identify the other side. The other side consists of Sharia law. It consists of intolerance. So when they talk about Islam, they only cite the friendly verses, and they don't realize that there are other verses that contradict those verses. It's a matter of education, and I'm excited that many Americans are trying to educate themselves, because you just don't see that. And our school system is being infected with the virus of this political correctness. They try to portray, Islam as all a system of hearts and flowers, and it does have that heart and flowers segment to it. It does have the same moral code. That's true. But if you ignore the other part, then you're only giving half the story, and half the story is no story.
The Muslim Brotherhood has become very strong in our country as well, almost covertly, very quietly moving into leadership roles. Can you share anything along that line?
Yes, no secret. The Obama administration has, and the Bush administration also coddled up to the Muslim Brotherhood. but not to the degree that the Obama administration has done so. They've filled many positions with individuals that are linked to the Muslim Brotherhood. This is open source information. This is not a conspiracy theory. President Obama has made those steps. He's intentionally done that. Why he's done it, it's a different story, but we know he's done it. The Muslim Brotherhood is not a Rotary Club. That group came out of Egypt. The current leader of Al-Qaeda is a former member of the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood is identified by the current government of Egypt as a terrorist organization. So, but they have two faces. They have a very benign face that they're all for tolerance, and we're just another friendly, religious belief. And if you say or question anything about the Muslim Brotherhood, of course, their tactic is to call you a hater and a warmonger or all sorts of other names. But the Muslim Brotherhood has a sinister side. The Holy Land Foundation, other cases, the information's out there. And of course, as with all organizations that have a sinister side, they don't present the sinister side, they present the happy side. The same could be said for CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations, another major force here in the United States. They present themselves as a benign group that's just trying to advance the religion of Islam in a culture that's unfriendly towards Muslims and a white supremacist culture. All these types of name-calling devices. And anybody that questions us is a hater also. But they never show you the other side of the coin. That is, the CARE is an unindicted co-conspirator. It's a fact in the Holy Land Foundation case here in Texas. And having dealt with members of CARE, having personal, anecdotal, evidence of my own, yeah, they put up a very happy face. But in my opinion, in many cases, they're a wolf in sheep's clothing. Their goal is to spread Islam, which is fine. I don't fault people for wanting other individuals to believe in their religion. But what does their religion teach them? What are they really saying is the question that we have to ask. What is your religion all about? And that's something that they don't want to debate. They will deny, for example, that Hamas is a terrorist organization. And so they're an organization that purports to represent the common Muslim in this country, but they don't. The common Muslim in this country does not adopt the views of radical Islam. They're more of a live and let live. They don't adopt Sharia law. They try to assimilate into our own culture while keeping their view of Islam, in their own cultural context. I have no problem with that at all. It's the individuals that have a motive that's outside of this mainstream, and people use that term, mainstream Islam. Those are the ones that bear watching.
Out in West Texas, we don't have any mosque. We haven't had the impact of what has happened here in San Antonio. I believe I understand that there are 13 mosques here now. What kind of changes are you seeing in San Antonio as this community grows?
Well, again, CARE tries to speak for all Muslims, both here in San Antonio. They have a president and chapter, but they don't. The vast majority of Muslims here are law-abiding citizens, American citizens that have done everything all Americans do. They fight in our military, they pay their taxes, they want their kids to have a better life, they go to co-educational classes, and they practice their religion. And so I don't think anybody would have a problem with that. I don't. But there, in the community, there are X amount of individuals that adhere to the doctrines of radical Islam. You can call them jihadists. We've had individuals that have been convicted here in San Antonio in federal court for links to radical Islam, and that's a fact. It's a fact that CARE will deny, and they'll demonize you if you dare say it, but it's true. So there's a very small minority of individuals that are not peaceful. They reject the American value system that made this country great. And we have to be able to distinguish between the two.
With the changes that we're seeing, it's made a lot of people uneasy. And out in West Texas, once again, around San Angelo, there's going to be the Jade Helm 15 operation starting in mid-July. Can you update? There's lots of rumors out there about a lot of scare, a lot of fear. Can you kind of shed some correct light on it?
I think one, that many people in this country, have a distrust of government. And of course, that's a healthy thing. Our country was founded as a limited government. In fact, when the Constitution was first written, the 13 states wouldn't adopt it. because there were no checks on the government. They had no Bill of Rights. They sent it back to the drawing board and said, we're not signing until you give us a Bill of Rights. So I think an American that understands the value system of this country has a fear of government. I have a fear of government, but it's not an illogical fear. It's not a fear that's based on, emotion. It's simply the idea that we know that, that power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Our founders recognized that, and they had a system of checks and balances and a Bill of Rights. So I don't fault anybody for having a fear of government. It's a healthy fear. And if you believe in limited government, you carry that around in your back pocket. You hear politicians tell you something and you say, okay, well, let me verify that. So, however, with this current administration, I think it's undeniable that particularly the red states, and most of those are in the South and the West, they do not trust this government as they've, as they would, I would suppose, a Republican that was in power. They view the Democrat Party as a party of big government, and the government is the solution to everything. And they've seen the Obama administration make a lot of missteps. And so they have a fear of government that sometimes, in some cases, borders on the bizarre. I hear rumors, and I've heard them for years, that President Obama is building a concentration camp in North Texas, and the Department of Homeland Security is coming to round us up, and they're buying up all the ammo, and therefore we better go get our guns and get survival things. So these rumors spread. I mean, in an open society, and particularly in today's cyberspace, anybody in their underwear can blog and Google anything they want to Google and blog. But I can tell you, having been in the military for 20 years, we are not that competent. We couldn't develop a concentration camp right under the eyes and nose of our media and the people of this country without there being concrete knowledge about it. There's no little green men at Area 51. The Bush administration didn't do an inside job on the Twin Towers, but these types of things somehow have a life of their own. The military does a lot of exercises all the time. In San Antonio, we do exercises about every month at Camp Mullis. But this one has taken on a kind of a life of its own, because you've got some Green Beret soldiers that are actually exercising for a scenario. What military exercises do is we anticipate a scenario, and then we train, what if that scenario happens, what would we do? In 2002, Congress passed a law creating U.S. Northern Command, which is a combatant command in Colorado. We've never had a combatant command that had a mission of protecting the homeland. And, but they've got that's a real threat. We could have a cell, for example, of 30 or 40 radical Islamic jihadists that would take over a small town somewhere. It's happened in other parts of the world. They would go into a school and kill every kid in the school, or go into a hospital. And it might overwhelm the capabilities of our local law enforcement. Therefore, you'd have to call in the military. So the military has to be trained. What if this would happen? What would we do? That's all this exercise is. I mean, what would we do if we had a situation like this? Which could very well happen. If we don't train for these exercises, then we're not going to be able to respond in a timely manner. So, the military is here to protect us, not to destroy us. And as a practical matter, we are the most heavily armed people on the face of the earth. This year in deer season, 400,000 people in Wisconsin took to the fields with guns, and nobody got hurt. In Pennsylvania, another 500,000. In Texas, I don't even know what the numbers are. We're the most heavily armed people on the face of the earth. It couldn't happen. Even if there was some type of a sinister plot, it simply couldn't happen. We realize what the Second Amendment was written for, and Texans are heavily armed. It simply could not happen, even if folks wanted it to happen. And many members of the military only follows lawful orders. They cannot arrest, they cannot search and seize. That's a violation of the Posse Comitatus Act. They cannot execute a search warrant, violation of federal law. And they cannot participate in arrest. That's the law. And the military knows that law. As a JAG officer, we train our military officers. Here's what the law is. If the president or anybody else gave them an order to engage in arrest and searches and seizures without emergency authority, they wouldn't do it. It's an illegal order. And we will not follow illegal orders. Simply would not do it.
That's reassuring. Is there anything else currently going on that you feel like my audience needs to hear about?
Well, we've got to lean forward in the saddle. I think if we did another conference, it would be about emerging threats, because nobody's really talking about what's the next step. We're talking about yesterday's news. And what we do as a people, and all humans do this, we do not prepare for the next threat, we simply respond to the last threat. For example, you didn't have to take your shoes off, and then we had one of the radical jihadists try to blow up a plane with his shoes on. And then we had the plot to put liquids and explosives. Then we started doing the liquid stuff. Well, there's new threats that are coming up that we are not prepared for. The 9/11 Commission report said that the biggest problem we have is lack of imagination. We've got to lean forward in the saddle. I'll give you a new threat coming up. The Government and Accounting Office just produced a report, and they said, did you realize that when you're sitting on an airplane, someone that has the skills on their laptop computer can hack into the pilot's computerized system in the airplane and take control of the plane. There's only one firewall between them and the pilot. And with ISIS, we know that many of these young guns, these new kids that are very intelligent in the ways of cyberspace, these people have the skills to do it. And so that's something that we need to be looking at. We need to counter this threat, think about the threat now, and I can give you 5 other things that are on the horizon that will come. And that's what we need to do, is talk about emerging threats. What's facing us now, and let's make suggestions on how to fix it now before it happens. We don't need to have another 9/11 and then respond to it.
Well, you want to share any of the other possibilities?
Oh, sure. We've got reports, and these reports have been here, about pandemics. You don't need a bomb. A pandemic is called the poor man's nuclear weapon. And a pandemic is a disease that can be transferred from person to person.
Such as the Ebola?
Well, Ebola is a little hard because you actually have to bodily contact. Some of the SARS, some of the viruses that can transport by airborne means, those are the dangerous ones. So you merely inject one of the true believers, the jihadists that are willing to die for the cause, with one of these diseases, put them on an airplane, have them come into the United States, and start getting involved with certain activities where they can spread the disease very rapidly. And then game's over. If you can't isolate that within a day, it's too late. So Ebola is something you can spread, you can isolate that because it has to be spread by bodily contact from person to person. But the airborne diseases, that's a different story. And there's federal provisions on how to deal with that, there's state provisions, but there's no implementing regulations on how to deal. We have broad authority to take control, both state and federal, but there's no implementing regulations about how you would do it. What are the mechanics? Who's going to do it? Where are you going to set these camps up? How are you going to isolate? How do you get a quarantine? What are the legal ramifications for taking property?
How far behind the curve are we on that?
Huge,
with the
huge,
yeah.
huge, way behind the curve. President Bush tried to address it when he was in office, implementing regulations. They proposed a series of regulations for the CRC, the CDC, Center for Disease Control out of Atlanta. Nothing happened. President Obama came into office, and they were all quietly shelved. We don't have any implementing regulations.
Wow. What about Iran?
Iran is the 500-pound gorilla that no one's talking about. The president has all his attention towards ISIS, which is not very much attention, but the real threat is Iran. Iran is a state sponsor of terrorism, and for the life of me, I cannot understand the president's fixation with dealing with the Iranians as if they're a Boy Scout troop. They're going to negotiate with them and come to some type of compromise. They are liars. They will not keep their word. Whatever agreement you get with these people isn't worth the piece of paper it's written on, and I doubt that you'll ever get an agreement. They are playing the president like an old violin, because every day that passes, they're closer and closer to the breakout where they can acquire a nuclear weapon. When that occurs, then the entire table is turned, because once they have nuclear weapons, then we don't have the leverage over them any longer. Then the cost of doing something increases exponentially. The time to stop them is before they get nuclear weapons, not after. After they get them, then the cost of doing something is going to be phenomenal. Now is the time to do it.
What would it take to stop them at this point?
We either bomb them or they get the bomb. I mean, that's basically what it boils down to. You're not going to negotiate your way into an agreement with the Iranians. You've got to take direct military action. You could start maybe with an embargo and maybe bomb one of their energy facilities where they refine their gasoline, try to bring them to their knees through economic sanctions. But if worse comes to worse, you need to dismantle those facilities. And that's going to require some leadership. It's going to require statesmen. President Bush didn't do it. President Obama, in my opinion, will not do it under any circumstances. Somebody's got to do it. Because if they get nuclear weapons, then the likelihood that they will pass that technology or that weapon on to another individual that will attack us is very high. They are the #1 threat to the nation right now, not ISIS. ISIS is grabbing all the headlines, and the Iranians are loving it because they behead 30, 40 people, they crucify people. These are horrendous crimes, but if you get a nuclear weapon, you're killing millions of people. And the whole map of the Middle East could change very quickly.
Would Israel, with their location and proximity to that, be a first line of defense?
Well, obviously, that's our only hope is the Israelis. We know that the Obama administration is not friendly towards the Israeli government at this time. And again, anybody who thinks that that is not true is simply not an informed citizen. Whether you're pro the Obama administration or anti the Obama administration, he does not have a friendly policy towards Israel. He's more concerned when the Israelis build a new apartment building in East Jerusalem than he is when the Iranians, are rattling the saber, shouting death to America. That doesn't seem to bother him as much. Priorities are wrong. The Israelis, in my opinion, are the only hope, and they're going to have to save us all, because, in my opinion, this administration will not do it.
How close do you think Iran is to having the nuclear bomb?
That's a good question. Several years ago I said it would be by 2014. 2014's come and gone. They're not as sophisticated as everybody thinks they are, but it could be this year, it could be next year. It's going to be soon. The clock is ticking. I know one thing: every day that goes by, they're a day closer.
Wow. Is there anything that John Q. Public, citizen, can do with this issue?
Well, I think, again, raise it as an issue. Write to your congressman, let your elected representatives know that you're very concerned, and we want something done. The American people need to be rallying, marching and showing support for Israel, and if for no other reason, they're the only ones that are going to stop Iran.
Well, I appreciate your time very much today. We look forward to having you back in San Angelo for a conference in the near future, I hope. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Kat. My pleasure.